I'm Judith Li, the author of Ellies Log and other books in the Ellie and Ricky series. My friend and illustrator of the book, Peg Herring, and I have had a chance to go to a number of classrooms where kids have asked us about what it's like to be an author. So today, that's what we're going to talk about. I want to start by explaining a little bit about me. I am a scientist who studies streams. And this picture of me collecting and measuring streams in various parts of Oregon. I'm particularly interested and fascinated by the little critters that live in the stream, the macroinvertebrates. This is a caddis on your right who's built a little rock case. And there's all kinds of caddisflies that I've studied, either that are crawling around or hiding in those nooks and building nets. You might recognize this little black snail called juga. It is very common all over Western North America. I like to think about the food webs that these invertebrates are part of in the stream. And also after they emerge as adults, like this dragonfly, they become part of a food web in the riparian and terrestrial landscape that the stream is connected to. Let me introduce you to the first aquatic insect that I had a rather major encounter with. It was the summer between the time that I was in the 3rd and the 4th grade. It was a day camp, and we were kind of just dinking around in a stream to find out what was there. Maybe some of you have done that too. And this giant water bug, it's only about an inch long, but as bugs go, that's pretty big, bit my finger. And it was a startling awakening to what does live in the stream. The one that I encountered, had eggs on it on the top and was probably a little bit protective of those eggs and very sensitive to our kind of poking around. Normally, it would eat other insects, small fish, and larval salamanders and tadpoles, which is rather impressive for a 1-inch bug, don't you think? But biting me was just an unusual experience. Studying streams has given me the chance to go to all parts of Oregon, on the coast, in the mountains, in the cool forests like in the Andrews, and in Eastern Oregon, where it's much warmer and the summers are very different. It's been an exciting way of doing research. Now, maybe you're like me and you like poking around in streams, but there are some of you, I suspect, who like watching birds, feeding them and humming in like this hummingbird here, or catching what kinds of flowers there are with the bumblebees buzzing around. And who doesn't keep track of those larger animals? This is a young fawn that we saw in our yard recently. There's so much to enjoy in the outdoors. From the time I was a kid and through my college years and all during my years as a scientist, I'm always curious about what I'm seeing when I'm outside. Who lives there? What are they doing? What is this habitat and what does it mean for the way it's been in the last month, in the last year? Lots of questions. And my habit of asking these questions, recording them in my journals, remembering them in my memory bank, gives me a rich resource for details that could fill the stories I've been writing. The first children's book I wrote was Ellies Log and was in response to a request from the National Science Foundation that wanted a children's book written about the forest at the H.J. Andrews, where we do research in the Cascades. So this gave me the setting for where the book was going to take place. But there are a lot of decisions that I, as the author, needed to make. And probably the first one I made was this was going to be a fictional story and based on our real research and the experiences that we'd had in the forest there. It was going to be about two kids exploring a forest in the season from winter to early summer. Ellie was the child of research scientists who live in the forest. So she had spent her life growing up in the forest and was very familiar with it. She is reminiscent of what my kids were like when they followed me around doing research as they were growing up. Ricky, on the other hand, was a newcomer, and he had come from Central Oregon and learning from Ellie the different things about the forest that she knew. He was a bit more agile, a little more athletic, but he was fascinated with the forest and followed her around. The other thing that he began interested in was mapping. And so as I wrote the story, the personalities of the kids became more clear. Ellie was the one who tended to jot down her notes and drawings in a journal, keep the data that both of them were collecting. He was the map maker. And what the interesting and surprising thing that happened about writing this book for me was that by the time I was done with this, I had developed two new friends. This is a story about a real place with the information about the animals and the plants being established by what I had seen there or what others had learned. You can see that this is a root wad of a tree that had really fallen down in the forest. And there are lots of examples of that in the book. After I had written all the chapters of the book in a draft, I gave it to be reviewed by one of my friends who was a teacher and another who does research up there. And when I got their suggestions back, I changed a good bit of the story so that it was more clear and might be more interesting to the reader. And then I was ready to give the draft to my friend Peg Herring, who is the illustrator. She and I read over the story together and considered what illustrations I had in mind. She put her touch on it, and in the end, provided the illustrations that I think make the story really come alive. The illustrations on the margins help tell a more information about the wildlife and plants that we found in the forest. The 2-page openers for each chapter were of her design and gave you an idea what that chapter was going to be about. And then there were the journal pages. We thought that it was very important that the information, that the way in which Ellie took the observations and data in Ellie's hand was an important thing for you to see and consider how you might draw your own illustrations and collect information in your own journal. And then there were the maps. Now, this one is a little more complicated than maybe Ricky would have drawn, but the idea of drawing out what you see on your adventures was an important thing. And another feature that we added then at the end of the book and of the other books as well was the Dear Reader part, where we hope you get some tips about how to do journals. Each story was set in a real place. And so the other 3 books of the Ellie and Ricky story series were based on places that we were familiar with and we thought were very important regions of our state of Oregon. I'd spent about 10 years studying streams in Eastern Oregon, and it wasn't unusual in the summer for us to worry that following thunder and lightning, we might see fire. And that became the core of what was the story, Ricky's Atlas, Mapping a Land on Fire. Ricky in the City was a book that took a lot longer to write for me because it took a lot of visits to Portland to explore its natural areas, learn about the different wildlife connections that are in that city. And in the end, it was set in the place that I'm most familiar with, the neighborhood in Southeast Portland where my son lives. And that book became Ricky in the City, where the wildlife live. For Ellie Strand, Peg Herring was the main author, and she combed the beaches not only to look for the wildlife and fascinating landscapes that are along the coast, but also to consider what kids can do to help keep it clean and prevent the microplastic pollution that's happening in our ocean. And so each of these books was based on the kinds of experiences we'd had, the data we'd collected in various ways, and also things that we could read about that other people had learned. I think that you might have life experiences to write your own stories. What stories could you tell? What have you seen? Where have you been? What do you have in your journals? It's a lot of fun writing about those things. And I hope that you can enjoy reading about the outdoors and writing about it too. Thanks.